Hello, and welcome to Book Circle Presents The Cavalry Cycle. This time we will continue our reading of Wake. Charlie and his sister Lily and his cousin Alex, along with the house brownie Trella, are going through the effects of their great-aunt Bet. This includes looking over the journal by her bedside in spite of the enchanted knife that's there on the table next to it. They returned to the bedroom, retrieved the book, and then, by unspoken consent, crowded around the fireplace at the other end of the room, away from the knife. Charlie leafed through. "The pages for the last few days are blank," he said, and found himself lowering his voice. Here's the last entry. Wednesday. Tired. Alex looked cross at being boxed into sympathizing again. Lily looked sad. She reached for the book, which Charlie surrendered. While she paged through Bet's final illness, Charlie looked around the bedroom. What had he missed while distracted by that animated knife? After examining the bed itself and a bookshelf, he brought his attention back to where they were standing, before a fireplace on the far side of the room. Above the mantel was another 3D picture, a still life showing a cupboard on a wall, its door ajar, above a wooden table littered with fruits, some peeled, some not. He went on looking. "Here's the last record of Uncle Dieter," Alec announced. "Back in winter on a Sunday. Dieter signed papers, stayed to talk. That's different." Charlie Horse nodded abstractedly. "This painting is different, too. Very different." "Oh?" asked Alex. "How?" "Several things. It's big, life-sized, too big for where it hangs, and it's under a glass cover with hinges. But mainly, it's a 3D picture that doesn't feel magic." He ran his hand along the top of the frame. "No ward button. How's it warded?" The other three traded looks, but no one offered an answer. "Look at the knife in the picture," said Lily, pointing. Of course there was a knife in the picture. On the table, amid the peeled apples and pears, lay a little knife suitable for the peeling. "It's shiny," Lily continued, "but the color's off, and it's more defined. No brush strokes at all. It looks real." Charlie Horse reached out to the glass over the picture and gave a sharp, light tap to the edge opposite the hinges. The glass pane swung open. He reached in. He could reach in. If this had been an ordinary 3D painting, his hand would have stopped at a canvas with its layers of glamoured paints. This was more. "Seemings," muttered Alex. Seemings were magical illusions that bordered on reality. Where glamour could only play with images and sounds, seemings could make changes of appearance that included size and distance. Charlie was reaching into a seeming of painted space. Charlie picked up the little knife. Yes, it was solid and real, but it still wasn't normal. He removed it from the imaged space and showed it to the others. The blade was shiny and smooth, but made of wood. "And enchanted," Lily said immediately. "Now you can tell that," Charlie Horse said. "There's a ward in the painting somewhere." He passed the knife to Trella and reached in again. He found he could lift the fruits, which felt like painted canvas, to look under, but there was no amulet or sigil or the like. He tried the cupboard door. It moved, so he opened it. There were little glass jars that had been half visible before. They did not reflect his incoming hand. On a shelf lay a ward button. Next to it lay a simple brass key, and next to the key lay a small oval frame. With a little fumbling, Charlie got them all in the grip of one hand and took them out. Ah! exclaimed Lily. Huh, right, said Alex. With the ward removed, the painting now registered as very, very enchanted. Charlie dropped the ward into his pocket, blinding it. That left him with the key in one hand and the frame in the other. Now, what have we here? He handed the key to Lily. Not actually enchanted, she told him, but it's been around enchantment a lot, which we knew. He looked at the frame. He had been expecting a picture or silhouette, perhaps of Dieter. Instead, the frame surrounded two panes of glass with an oak leaf between them. The leaf was old and brown, and flakes had broken off. On one pane, etched in neat, tall letters, were the words, Mien Darach. He frowned. Why frame an oak leaf? What did the engraving mean? He remembered now that Darach was Irish for oak. Oh. With deliberate care, he handed the framed leaf to Alex, who noticed the care and received it cautiously. What's this? Alec asked. Then, examining the object, what does Mien Darach mean? I'm looking it up, said Charlie, busy with his phone. Thought so. He met Alex's eyes. Oak wish. Fuddle, said Alex. Lily stared. Trella yipped. But it's not enchanted, Lily objected. No more it is, agreed Charlie Horse. Anyway, you can see it's been used up. They stay fresh until then. Alex let out his breath. Good. You don't want an oak wish? Charlie asked with a mocking grin. I do not. I know the stories about wishes. Wise man. Thanks. But where the I couldn't begin to imagine. Well, I can imagine where, but not how. Ireland, of course, said Lily, or Tir nan Og, or somewhere like that. And we also have some idea who. Charlie Horse nodded. The Dagda, the Morrigan, Macha, Angus, some big number from the Tuach. He gazed thoughtfully into the distance. Oak wishes are usually valued at a full year of nights each. And someone used this one. He focused on Alex. Are you game? Sure, he answered, squaring his shoulders. He then stared at the framed leaf for 2 long minutes. Trella hopped to Charlie's back. He okay? She asked. Just being thorough. He and Lily are taking lessons in this at school. I'm just picking it up as I go along, so they're well ahead. Yeah, well, you're busy marching across the Atlantic desert and stuff. Someday, said Alex, breaking silence, they'll teach me the tricks for precise dating, but not yet. The wish was used many years ago, a few decades, but I can't say more exactly. The wish was founded way long ago, centuries, I suppose, by a fae. Well, I can't get anything like that off the key, said Lily. It's just been around magic. Charlie nodded. Trade with Trella. Look at the wooden knife. Lily obeyed and soon said, The knife is part of a system of enchantments. It's meant to be used with some other enchanted things, fae made. Trella, what can you say about the key? Charlie Horse asked. It's part and parcel of your system, she told Lily. They have the same smell coming off. Now, give me a minute. She rolled the key in her hands, tossed it up and down a few times, then said, Right, the lock to this key is somewhere in my house. Follow me. A few minutes later, they were gathered in the basement. The ceiling forced Charlie into an uncomfortable crouch. The basement was dim and slightly dank, but it was in Trella's care, so it was not dusty or cobwebby, and the contents were neatly laid out. They were gathered around a small steamer trunk, such as Victorians used on trips abroad. Trella turned the key, and Alex opened the lid. Inside were stacked white linen bundles. These been moved around not too long ago, Trella told them. I can tell. They ain't settled like they would if they was left for years. Each of them removed a bundle and unwrapped it, each to find an article of clothing. Charlie had a 1950s poodle skirt. Lily, a striped jacket that looked about a century old. Alex, a tie-dyed blouse. And Trella, a white turtleneck sweater. Nothing was enchanted. This is camouflage, Charlie Horse declared, or there's a hidden significance. Let's keep going. Without unwrapping any more bundles, they worked on emptying the trunk. And near the bottom, they found a larger bundle, hard and rectangular, wrapped in an oilskin. "Ta-da!" said Alex. Charlie Horse lifted it out and started unwrapping the oilskin. "This wrap is a ward, like the buttons," he reported as he worked. He uncovered a chest of light wood, about the dimensions of 2 shoeboxes end to end. Everyone could feel the enchantments within. When Charlie opened the brass latch, it split lengthwise into equal halves. They looked inside, trying to make sense of what they saw. The chest was packed with white rope, interspersed with palm-sized discs of yellow metal, brass, bronze, gold, copper, or something more exotic. There was no way to tell in the dim light. Charlie Horse sighed in exasperation. "Let's take this up to the kitchen and see it in the light." They climbed, he clambered and squeezed, and presently they were all back in the kitchen, the chest on the table. In the full light, they could see an inscription on the face in unsealed script. "Cruthana on Dagda." "The Dagda's shapes," Charlie Horse announced after running it through translation. Name droppers. The Dagda knows his favorite shapes by heart and can do just about anything impromptu. He doesn't need a box of charms. "Maybe these are copies of his favorite shapes by an admirer," Lily proposed. "Let's see how this works." She reached in and lifted out a rope. It was thick, soft, and slick, a light beige, finished off with a big and decorative knot at each end, and about a fathom long. It laced through a medallion in the middle, one of the discs. She ran it through her hands. Charlie and Alex joined in. "I think the rope is raw silk," said Charlie Horse, "and the medallion is bronze." He examined it. It was a mass of looping Celtic knotwork. "They showed us something like this in class," Lily said thoughtfully. "I think it's a shape-shifting spell. Not glamour, not seeming. Real shape-shift." "For a stag, I think," said Charlie, and showed them the knotwork design. "Trella?" He presented the rope to her. "Huh. Never saw it chanted up before. Just did it. But shapeshift all right. Stag? Could be." They pulled out more ropes and examined their medallions. Bear, eagle, boar. "Look," said Lily, pointing into the half-empty chest. There was a small wooden tab with a pointed outline carved into it. "It's for this." She took the little wooden knife and fitted it in. "Right," Charlie murmured. "Part of the system. But how does the system work? Trella?" "No idea. Don't use a system." "Well," said Lily brightly, "we could experiment." Charlie Horse looked up from the ropes and met her gaze. "You mean that?" "Yes, I mean that. One of the many results of your transformation, dear brother, was getting the lot of us thinking and wondering about it. Alex and Iris and I have certainly talked about it together." "And Oliver and me," added Alex, "and Bev." "Oliver? And Beverly? Really? She can hardly bear to look at me," said Charlie Horse. "Well," admitted Alex, "with Bev it was a sort of horror stories around the campfire way. But a lot of us are just plain curious. What's it like?" Charlie Horse waved his arms helplessly. "It can't really be described. It does not hurt. It's confusing. Maybe more confusing than any of these transformations because it breaks homology." "Homology?" echoed Alex. "His body doesn't map evenly onto a human one," Lily explained. 6 limbs instead of 4, and a tail. If you transform into a boar, your right arm becomes the boar's right front leg. Where did your front legs come from, Charles? I've wondered." Charlie Horse gazed at his younger sister with interested surprise. She, too, was a natural researcher, apparently. "My arms split," he answered. He enjoyed the look of consternation on their faces, then turned his attention inward. "Then the bottom one turns into a horse foreleg, while the top one stays the same. At the same time, my spine is lengthening and growing a new rib cage, and these new lower arms and shoulders are sliding down my body into position, and a tail shows up somewhere, and the toes go away. I was the last in line for the magic arrow and watched it happen 5 times to the other guys in my class. And I've seen the videos of my own transformation. And here I am, years later. This is me now, permanently, barring misadventure. I like being this. I chose it. But it was the strangest, most confusing thing to ever happen to me. So think carefully about experimenting, especially if we've no idea how to reverse it. His sister and cousin nodded soberly, but Lily said, "The knife?" Charlie was silent for a while. "My guess, just guessing based on examples I've read about, is that you wrap or tie the rope around yourself or someone else to change them, then use the knife to change them back, poke or slice. Don't know if it would be necessary to draw blood. The thing is, the examples I'm thinking of are just seeming skins, and just seeming, not true shapeshift as here." "Well, let's keep unpacking," said Alex. "Maybe there are instructions in there." He pulled out a rope and looked at the medallion. "Bull." Lily pulled out one. "Fish, probably a salmon. Magic Celtic fish, gonna be a salmon, not, say, a herring." Charlie pulled one out. He puzzled over the semi-abstract pattern for several seconds, then said, "Tree." "Tree?" chorused Lily and Alex. "Look at it." He displayed the medallion to them. "Oak tree," Lily specified. "Look at the leaves. Those are oak leaves if they aren't bunches of grapes. Anyway, these here are acorns." "Yep, oak tree," agreed Alex. Then Lily shuddered. "I always hated the idea of being transformed into a tree. Nothing of you left, just the bare life." "It fits the boast on the lid, though," murmured Charlie Horse, running the rope through his fingers. "The Dagda can disguise himself as an oak tree, in which state he's still entirely the Dagda and has been known to fight some very surprised foes. I wish I could pick out the spell, but all I get is a faint smudge of the energy, a residue. Here, you try." He handed the rope to Lily and picked up the one for the boar. "Nothing at all." He handed it to Alex. "You try." "Right, empty," said Alex. "Been empty for a long time. At least a century, I'd guess. Maybe several. But there's some major spell in there, just needs to be powered up." "This one isn't quite empty," Lily agreed, holding the rope with the tree medallion. "But it holds a whacking great transformation spell, too. I'm sure it's transformation." She grimaced again and put it back. "Let me try yours," she said to Alex, reaching out. She verified it bore a big, elaborate spell, but was completely drained of vis, of power. She frowned, then quickly ran her hands over all the ropes. "They're all drained, all but the tree one with its leftover whiff." "Well," said Charlie Horse, "so much for experimenting, at least for the time being. Transformations take a lot of power. I don't suppose any of us is carrying more than a night's vis at the moment." He was working to keep the relief out of his voice. He was surprised at how uncomfortable he felt over the idea of Alex, or worse yet, Lily, transforming themselves even as an experiment. Familiar, loved faces annihilated behind muzzles, beaks, bark, even if only temporarily. All the fights and arguments he had had with his family about his own change would need to be re-examined now that he could better see their point. In particular, had they valued him more than he had realized? He felt an ache behind his eyes. If he put his mind to it, he could start weeping. Not now. Charlie Horse picked up the tree rope and studied it closely, this time with his senses. Was it ever so faintly grubbier than the others, less purely white? He examined the decorative knots at the ends. There did seem to be a little dirt caught in them here and there, tiny flecks. "Trella," he asked, "could you examine this? Could you smell it?" Trella was standing on the edge of the table opposite Charlie. She took a step backward, dropped off, then popped up at Charlie's elbow as a fox. She sniffed carefully at the tree rope for several seconds, then at the other ropes briefly, then sat back and said, "Well, here's the thing. Your Aunt Bet's handled all those ropes, but she handled this one the most by a lot. And it's the only rope that smells of your Uncle Dieter. They were all in the kitchen garden. Charlie Horse had announced, "I have to get outside," and left another round of horsehair on the doorframe as he squeezed out. The others had joined him willingly enough. Trella, the only one not upset, had brought out a bottle of brandy and some glasses. Alex and Lily accepted shot glasses. Trella offered Charlie a tumbler. He muttered about blood volume and accepted it. He had discussed the bodily changes of transformation with Lily and Alex, but he had not touched on the mental ones. His mind was now and evermore equine as well as human, and he was fighting an urge to bolt, to gallop away down the country road with no thought of what lay ahead, only for getting away. But neither a war horse, nor a soldier, nor a wise man can act like that. Trella observed how her mortal guests worriedly scanned the woods beyond the garden fence. "He ain't in there," she told them. "Folks would notice an oak tree popping in and out." Trella's folks, certainly. "Then where?" demanded Alex. He knocked back his brandy because he'd seen people do that in movies and instantly regretted it. "Did she just tool over to Sherwood and check him out for the day?" he asked in slightly strangulated tones. "She didn't drive these last several years," Trella reminded him, "but the books say she kept on having Dieter over." "So he's somewhere close," said Lily. "Trella, can you find him? Douse for him the way you found the lock to the key?" She looked doubtful. "He ain't mine, and it's harder if he shape-shifted, but I'll give it a try." She went back in the house and returned with the tree rope. Holding it by the medallion, she turned in a circle with a considering look on her face, but then shook her head. "Sorry." "Now what?" asked Alex. Charlie Horse said thoughtfully, "There can't be many oak trees in walking distance for a 90-year-old woman if we eliminate the ones in the forest back there." "What if it's a little sapling or an acorn?" Lily asked. "I don't think it will be," Charlie answered. "Bears, boars, stags, they're styling these shapes after the dog disguises. Unless the whole thing is an exercise in misdirection, this will be a nice big tree. Anyway, it's only reasonable to start with big ones." "Hold it," said Alex. "How could she do this? You said these transformations need a lot of vis, more than all of us have combined. How could a little old lady do it?" "She could have a stockpile somewhere," Lily countered, "or someone could have owed her." "Possibly," agreed Charles. "But we know she had the austerity knives." "Ah, right, with traces of blood on them," Alex recalled. Lily nodded. "So that's no problem." "There's the spinney across the road," said Trella. They stared at her, confused. "He was asking about oak trees outside the forest. Other side of the hedgerow, there's a hayfield with a spinney in it. Forest folk don't go there much, too much unsundered traffic, but we knows about it, and there's oak trees there." "Lead the way," said Alex, waving toward the road with his empty shot glass. "Wait," commanded Charlie Horse. "How are you going to know which tree it is?" "He is." "Can't we just try the wooden knife on every oak until one turns into Uncle Dieter?" asked Alex. "How big is this spinney?" Lily countered. "We could," Charlie answered Alex, "but there's a faster way. We can use that mirror. But the other problem with using the knife is that we don't have the accumulated power to make the reverse transformation. Remember?" "Not," said Lily slowly, "without the austerity knives." "Right," Charlie Horse breathed. "This isn't going to be pleasant." He finished his brandy and started toward the kitchen door. "Well, we have preparations to make for our little expedition. I can think of a couple of other things to bring as well." And we'll follow them on their little expedition next time.